China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently spoke about the diplomatic work of the country in 2017. He believes that as the largest developing country, China's diplomacy should aim to create a better external environment for the country's modernization while being mutually beneficial for the rest of the world. With this in mind, what has China accomplished in 2017, and what are the challenges that will test it in the near future? To review the passing year, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Su Ge, President of the China Institute of International Studies, Hua Liming, China's former ambassador to Iran, and Rick Dunham. He will be joining us in the second half of the program, but currently he's a visiting scholar with the Tsinghua University. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Before we get started, let's take a look at this.
First of all, China's philosophy has been well received around the globe. Chinese President Xi Jinping elaborated on this philosophy during his speeches at the World Economic Forum in Davos and the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, voicing the need for promoting economic globalization and building a community of common destiny. And during the G20 summit in Hamburg and the APEC summit in Vietnam, President Xi also elaborated the Chinese concept of building an open world economy and promoting economic integration in the Asia-Pacific region. Secondly, China put its approach to global governance into practice. China held the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. International consensus has been reached among countries to work together under the Belt and Road Initiative. We also hosted the BRICS Summit in Xiamen in September, building a new platform of South-South cooperation. Thirdly, China took concrete measures to promote global peace and development. We strengthened coordination and cooperation with major countries like the United States and Russia. We improved relations with neighboring countries and made breakthroughs in ties with other developing countries. China also asserted its sovereignty and legal interests. We adopted peaceful resolution in terms of the face-off along the China-India border. We insist on the One China policy and thus have built diplomatic ties with Panama.
Welcome to Dialogue, Ambassadors. Now, we start with a question about the political philosophy of Mr. Xi Jinping, who shapes very much the diplomatic work and guidelines of such a diplomacy of China in the passing year of 2017. But what are the major points implied in Xi Jinping's political philosophy that may help create an improved world order?
In one sentence, it's a shared future of the humanity. You see, during the last century, the world used to live in the Cold War, and we have confronting two blocks in the world. And the mentality of the most politicians of the world were zero-sum games. And there used to be the rivalry and the struggle between the two blocks led by the former Soviet Union and the United States. But now, China is growing so fast and quick, and I think as a big power, a growing big power, China has to propose a very new idea to the future world. The future world would be a shared future, not to have the zero-sum game mentality, not to have the Cold War mentality. This is, I think, the core of the Xi Jinping's thinking about the Chinese future foreign policy.
Well, the recent release of the American strategic white paper listed China as a strategic competitor, and seldom did the paper mention the words like engagement that has been practiced since the normalization of the bilateral relationship in the late 1970s. Does it mean that the geopolitical rivalry will be growing between the two major powers? And secondly, Foreign Minister Wang Yi took China as the biggest developing country I believe politicians around the world may seriously disagree. They say, hey, come on, China's become the second biggest economy. Politically and economically, China exercises an enormous influence the world over. So what do you think of the new dynamics in our diplomacy?
I think that Ambassador Hua is right. China is changing, and the world is changing. And any country's diplomacy is an extension of its domestic politics and domestic economics and so on. China is developing, and China's national interests and the ramifications are changing also in the process. What I'm saying is that the world is changing while China is moving up, and naturally is going to affect the old existing world political structure. I think when you talk about President Xi Jinping's thought on diplomacy, one key is that he's trying to avoid the Cold War mentality, like the zero-sum game and so on. And when he sees the fact that the United States is the only status quo power, China is moving up, and President Xi Jinping sees the necessity of avoiding the so-called Thucydides trap, meaning that this rising power is not going to challenge the basic core interests of the status quo power. And also, in return, he hopes that this status quo power will not challenge the core interests of the rising power. Therefore, President Xi Jinping says that, well, these two big nations, we have lots of things in common. Of course, we have lots of things which are not like each other. However, the most important thing is that cooperation serves as the correct choice for the bilateral relationship.
Instead of confrontation.
Yes.
Ambassador Hua, do you believe this principle of the Belt and Road Initiative and the community of shared destiny are actually the extension of the five principles of peaceful coexistence that were first put forward in the 1955 Bandung Conference, which was attended by representatives from Asian and African developing countries? Namely, the essence of Xi Jinping's thoughts aims to pursue peaceful co-prosperity between different political systems.
Yes, you're right. The five principles of peaceful coexistence remains one of China's foreign policy principles. And since the world is changing, and we need some new ideas to deal with the globalization, to deal with the new trends of the world. And I think that one of the specifics we are facing this new world in 21st century is that countries or nations have been deeply interwoven to each other and deeply dependent to each other, neither politically or economically, technologically. So we need some new ideas to deal with each other, to have to
but the issue is, what are the new thoughts, Ambassador Su?
I think that your question is an excellent one. When you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, that was certainly something put forward by President Xi Jinping 2013, first in Kazakhstan and then Indonesia. He talks
Does
about
the Belt and Road Initiative aim to replace the American primacy? Because that's the essence of American fears concerning the Thucydides discourse.
Well, some people would think that way, but I don't think they have got the essence of President Xi Jinping's thought. Because I think President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative were put forward in response to the needs of globalization. We all know that globalization is a double-edged sword that can slash both sides. Mm-hmm. They achieved so many things for mankind. However, during the process, certain people, you can see that there is the imbalanced development. For instance, during the process of globalization, you can see there is a more developed Europe, and then especially since the latter half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, you can see the economy of Asia Pacific being a one of vitality. Well, but the countries or the region in between, like Central Asia, is less developed because these countries, they are further away from waters, from the oceans, and so on. So the Belt and the Belt and Road Initiative, the key of which is interconnectivity. By interconnecting Central Asia, and by interconnecting Europe, by interconnecting Asia Pacific region, and in this way we are going to create a much more interconnected world, and
which aims to be more inclusive. Right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Ambassador Hua Limin and Ambassador Su Ge. We are reviewing China's diplomatic work in 2017. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, gentlemen. We are very happy to be joined in the second half by Mr. Rick Dunham, a visiting scholar with the Tsinghua University. He's from the United States of America. Now, what's the American perspective on the Indo-Pacific strategy that was released by President Donald Trump, who also takes China as a strategic competitor? And that means many Chinese scholars are concerned that the traditional policy of engagement will be over.
Well, the whole idea of Indo-Pacific is interesting to me, like the pivot to Asia of the previous administration. It almost doesn't matter who is president. There seems to be a foreign policy bureaucracy that has a policy of containing China. The difference between, I think, the Indo-Pacific strategy and pivot to Asia of the Obama administration is that it brings India in, and to me that increases the tension between India and Pakistan because of the Chinese-Pakistani relationship. So to me it's another form of political containment of China, as opposed to the idea of economic cooperation being the lead factor in the relationship.
Ambassador Su, what do you think of the game, if not a dance, between the elephant and the dragon in South Asia? If you look at the crisis in Doklam along the line of control in southern Tibet.
I think the way to look at the situation, the angle, is very important, because if you see somebody as your competitor, as your enemy, and probably you'll make that one into that
in fact,
direction.
what you say suggests this is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So in my mind, that I don't think India is China's enemy, because when you look at the whole world, look at the 21st century, one most important phenomenon is that the world is changing, because there is this group of developing countries and newly emerging economies on the rise. China, India, Russia, Brazil, they are all part of this new group. So if you look at India-China relations in this fashion, they are really, they are partners. However, I think that when you look at China, just now our friend mentioned the China-Pakistan relationship. China-Pakistan, when we proceed with this Belt and Road Initiative, we have the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and that's one of the flagship of the Belt and Road Initiative. But it has to go through Kashmir. But it has to go to Kashmir. But that's one reason why India is feeling unhappy about it. Well, if you look at the CPEC, that's the way of linking China through Pakistan And then the Guadar is really 100 kilometers from Iran. So it's an economic program. I don't think it is strategically.
Ambassador Hua and Rick Denham, do you think, to say nothing of the Kashmir and Jammu headaches and problems for New Delhi, the issue of terrorism as well, do you think India is strongly concerned about the so-called pole theory, the pole theory conspiracy?
I don't think this is a pole theory. As a growing economy in the world, and India is going to be one of the leading economies in the world, it's going to expand its influence for different direction. As China, today we are going to the Blue Sea, and we have our influence over Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. I think that this is the same thing for India. I think as a growing power, India is thinking about. Maybe you will ask that India has something intention to contain China. That might be some kind of intention, but I think mainly as a growing economy and as a big growing Asian power, India have its extension of interests from Indian Ocean to Pacific Ocean.
Rick?
I think India sees China as its leading economic competitor of this century. They see the future as China and India being the leading growing economic powers in the world. But they also see China as a military threat. China's military is much more advanced than India's. They're seeing a base on Djibouti. They're seeing a presence in Sri Lanka. They're seeing the Belt and Road with the deep water port in Pakistan, and they sort of see themselves ringed by the potential of Chinese military that has power that they do not have. They can compete. I think they believe they can compete economically, but I think they're worried about the military side, that they do not have the influence that China has militarily.
So far, we've been discussing issues concerning major power politics in the post-Cold War era, particularly the strained relation between Washington and China, because both Democrats and Republicans start seriously to reassess their traditional policy of engagement with China, given the rapid expansion of China's economy and the implied or the proposed geo-economic ambition of the Belt and Road Initiative, which threatens allegedly to challenge the American primacy. Having said this, to cultivate good neighborly ties is also an integral part of China's diplomatic work. For example, what do you make of the implications of the recent official visit by President Moon Jae-in from ROK with the deployment of a THAAD and the nuclear missile tests by the DPRK, as well as the war games and the war cloud gathering on the shores of China in Northeast Asia? Mr. Suga.
Well, international relations, you have a lot of things to think about, to handle. One of the most difficult things in international relations is to handle neighboring countries' relationship. Because China and South Korea used to have very good relationship. And it has to do with the recent, there have been ups and downs simply because of the DPRK issue. I think the China's issue is that, for DPRK nuclear issue, we want a denuclearization, we want a peace and stability, we want a peaceful solution, diplomatic solution. But for the South, they have this relationship with the United States in order for to respond to the missile threat from the North. They came up with the THAAD. But the THAAD system, because of the X-band radar system, it saps the defense capabilities, security interests of Russia and China. So China and South Korea have had negotiations very intensively. Finally, up till now, there have been some promises from the South, And we are happy to see that this issue basically and all up to now has been solved through diplomatic means. And the relationship between China and South Korea have
the most important neighbor of
restored
China, I'm afraid, other than India, has been Japan. The year 2018 will see will commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Treaty of Friendship between these two most important countries in Northeast Asia. Are you optimistic, Rick, about remarkable improvement? Have you seen any positive signs concerning a thaw in this bilateral relationship?
The answer is, the first time in my 5 years in China, I see some reason for optimism. There have been signs this year of at least the first signs of a thaw, and I do think that now Prime Minister Abe feels secure in his power, and once he feels secure in his power, he will not need it to be as strong in his nationalist rhetoric. But there's always a risk. There's always a risk because of the issue of changing the constitution in Japan, which is a non-starter in China.
Domestic politics aside, Rick, what do you think of the impact of the U.S. decision to pull out of the TPP? That may have also led to the Japanese concerns.
Excellent point. I think that that's a big part. I think it's not just Japan, but Japan was the #1 partner in that, and Japan wants to move on. Japan wants to broaden trade. I mean, they were happy to broaden trade with the United States and other nations in the Asia Pacific. Now they will broaden it without the United States. And so there is potential, if the two countries can stop the political arguments back and forth, to forge at least the beginnings of an economic partnership that could benefit both of the countries. I think that's the big thing, to shift geopolitics and to move to an more economic-based relationship.
The last question, gentlemen, is very much about your prediction on the most important and most consequential bilateral relationship in the 21st century, the United States and China. Given the release of the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, the reassessment of this bilateral relationship has somehow cast a shadow on the prospects of the ties. Do you believe that the United States will take a series of punches, series of measures to let China feel constrained? It aims to rebalance the Chinese influence, and that may sometimes create a sense of crisis.
The best way to deal with U.S.-Chinese relationship is just the principles put forward by Chinese government is no confrontation, no conflict, and mutual respect, and win-win cooperation. But unfortunately, with the presence of a new president in the White House, we see some unpredictable things.
Unpredictability and uncertainty of the president.
So we have to be prepared to deal with unpredictable U.S. government.
Now, Dr. Su Ge, some Chinese, however, surprisingly, put forward the vision. It's a good thing. It's a blessing for China to be regarded equally by the United States as a strategic competitor, because they used to look down upon China as a catch-up economy. For the first time in the history of the bilateral relationship, China has been seriously regarded as a strategic competitor on an equal footing. They say, hey, now we're a big guy. What do you think of their
You're right.
note of irony?
China's, or what we say, comprehensive national competence is moving up. There got to be some people in the United States who feel a little worried about it. But I think the most important thing is that the United States and China, they are two big powers, two nuclear powers. And it's most important for these two to remain on the peaceful path. And economically, I think they have a lot of complementary things for both countries. We need to put emphasis on cooperation and manage the differences.
The ability to settle disputes and manage a crisis would be a serious test. Rick, the last question very quickly is, do you believe bilateral trade and economic relationship will decline sharply, despite the fact that President Trump has been able to take home a hefty contract of up to $250 billion through his short official visit to China?
I do not believe there will be a sharp decline as long as Donald Trump remains president, because although this government policy supposedly has changed, Donald Trump says things that are very positive about Xi Jinping and about the Chinese economy. Now, if Trump ends up in political trouble, all bets are off. I think his vice president and I think the Congress of the United States are much more hostile to China than Donald Trump is.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Whether the United States and China are destined for a war, be it economic war or a military confrontation, that would be one of the major issues on the agenda of both governments, Washington and Beijing. Let's watch out and figure out what will be the global implications. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.